This video was produced to introduce basic information about the operation of standard equipment, machinery, and tools found in a metal shop. A video cannot replace in-person instruction. Watching a video does not replace experience, and this video does not introduce every possible situation or circumstance involved in using equipment successfully and safely. I do not assume liability for damage or injury resulting from the information this video provides. Continuing to watch this video affirms your agreement to waive any claim of liability you may have against me by implementing any procedure or recommendation contained here. Shops are inherently dangerous places full of equipment that can cause injury if not used correctly. You must use care and pay attention when using equipment for your own safety and for the safety of those around you. Dress appropriately to work with equipment, wear shoes that protect your feet and clothes that cover your skin, remove all loose clothing and jewelry, wear eye protection at all times. If you do not feel confident using a piece of equipment, don't. Ask for help or guidance from someone with more experience.
The jeweler saw holds a fine blade in a frame to allow precision hand cutting of sheet metal and the easy creation of internal openings. I was trying to stay out of all my instructional videos, but this is the jeweler saw. It needs a body in the picture, so whatever. This is my favorite tool of all tools. It's almost everyone else's least favorite. It requires practice. It doesn't require any skill. It doesn't require a lot of care. It's a really versatile piece of equipment that, if you get good at it, will get you out of a lot of binds and give you a lot of opportunities. Most people don't want to invest the time in getting good at it. It's like how everybody just wants the magic wand in Photoshop instead of actually doing anything that will work better. There are many different jeweler saws. I own 3. This is the standard one that you mostly will see. It's just a standard jeweler saw frame. This one has a deeper throat. So you'd think this is better because you can get in farther. But the jeweler saw relies on tension to keep the blade at the right resistance. This has so much flexibility that it's really hard to tension the blade. The blade tends to just bend around. Because it's hardened steel, the more it bends, the more it gets stressed and the quicker it will break. Really easy to break blades with this one. This one you'd think is good because it's smaller. Why have that big thing like this little one? This has no flexibility, so it's actually really hard to tension the blade at all. So these blades tend to be either too loose or too tight, but it's difficult to use this. So I use the standard one for 99% of what I do, but every once in a while there's a corner I can't reach, or there's a interior or something I need to get inside of. So these have proved useful, and you'll see them around, but you should just use the standard one. The blade is tiny. In fact, it's so small that I can no longer see it on the table. When I learned how to use the jeweler saw in like 1852, Ken Honeybell taught me, and he was a white dude in his 50s who had to put his reading glasses on and still couldn't see the teeth on the saw. And at the time I just thought, well, that's time to retire, buddy. Why are you teaching kids how to use a jeweler saw if you can't even see the blade? And here I am, white dude in his 50s, who can't even find the blade. The good thing about jeweler saw blades is you don't actually need to see them to use them. They have teeth in one direction, on one side. You maybe can see this. Oh, there's my other blade. It's just sitting there. I found it. You can probably see the teeth on this. I'll try and do a close-up photograph. They go in one direction. So with my finger, I can feel which side it's on, and I can feel which direction they're going, because one direction, my finger just skirts across the points of the teeth, and the other direction, it stops. So I know that the teeth are facing this way, and they're currently facing up. I can grab my frame and put the blade in. I'm going to put the reading glasses on. Also, safety note. This doesn't seem like a dangerous tool. All tools are dangerous. There are inherent dangers. You should always wear safety glasses. These blades get work hardened, so they either break because you're not experienced enough to keep them from breaking, or you're cutting something difficult, or you used it so long that it gets work hardened and it just snaps. At some point, the blade will break. So if the blade breaks and you get a piece in your eye, guess how it has to be removed? High-powered magnet or surgery, or it can't. So I don't get why people aren't willing to wear safety glasses to prevent a situation where they're rushed to the emergency room, clutching their eye, to have a high-powered magnet touched to their eyeball. I mean, just wear safety glasses. Also, on the downstroke, you have to support your work to keep it from vibrating, because that will make the blade break. So theoretically, the closer your hands can be to that blade, the better this situation is. But again, on the downstroke, if the blade breaks, your hands are there. So I always try and establish a sort of balance between my hands being useful, but not imperiled. So I'm going to put this blade in this way down and this way forward, I hope. here's how the frame works. It has a thumb screw here that changes the height of the opening. I rarely have to do that because I almost always use a full blade. The reason you would want to do that, blades are standard, but if you break a blade and still have a useful part, you can condense your frame and use that smaller piece. And I love coming in the shop and seeing people using little itty bitty 2-inch blades because they're being thrifty. So I'm going to set that. I always use my body to press the handle in. Most people probably don't do that, but I'm going to set the blade in the bottom first. I open up the thumb screw, slide the blade between the two plates. This is really hard to do. Can't see a thing. And then tighten that thumb screw. So now I've got the blade. I'm just going to check. No, I did it backwards. The blade is facing in, which a lot of people do. A lot of students say to me, I don't understand why this stupid tool isn't cutting. And I'll say, well, because the teeth are on the wrong side. So that's a good thing to get familiar with. I'm going to turn that around. I'm starting with the smallest size blade too, which I never use. It's my enemy. Okay, the blade is facing out, the teeth are facing down. The next thing you want to do is get the height set correctly if it isn't. Where you want your height is just above where the blade ends. So this is a little bit too high. I'm going to lower that. I'm going to loosen this. My saw frame is so old that it's rusted, so I can always see where the standard setting is. So the blade is now ending just below that clamp. That way when I push the clamp in and tighten it, it's pulling that blade. You could do this by hand. I don't know how people do it. That's a struggle. You could put it in your bench dog and push with your hand and tighten. That's probably the best way to do it. I don't know why. I always do it against the table with my body. That gives me 2 free hands, and I prefer that. So now you can see the blade is, let's see if I can get it on this camera. The blade has a little bit of flex. I can push in, not too much, but it's a little bit flexible. This is actually pretty tight. I can't give you a rule about how tight that blade needs to be. It needs to be tight enough that it's not bending around the metal when you're cutting and getting stressed out, but not so tight that if you sneeze, it'll break. I'm then going to take some beeswax and rub it on the back of the blade. That adds some lubricant there that can just live there until it gets used up. I'm not going to start with tin-plated steel. I'm going to start with a piece of aluminum. I always start a cut by going up first. That sort of files a little notch, because if you start with the teeth down, it's likely to just jam. And then I'm going to go straight up and down. Here's why chair height is super important. My arm is only the power source. It must not do anything else. Let me switch arms and show you what that means. So I'm sitting low. I would actually like to be a little bit lower. My arm was designed to do this and all sorts of things, but now I only want up and down. So I only want my elbow to move. Anything I can do to isolate the rest of it will help. So sitting low, for me, allows me to just do that. Straight up and down. That's all you want. No pushing, no, just straight up and down. Also, a chair with arms is probably not a great choice, but this is my only available chair, so it will have to do. Also, a note on vices. I've chosen one that can rotate on a corner so that I have control over where I sit. I see so many people in the shop trying to cut with their arm pinned between them and the vise and the table, and they have no options. I have seen lots of people also trying to cut this way. Just find a different vise, or set your chair up differently, or ask your neighbor to move. So I've got this set up on a corner so that I can use either hand. I can move around freely. So I'm going to push up and start the cut, and then I'm just going to cut. I am not pushing forward. Only the slightest pressure. I'm mostly just going up and down. And then I'm going to steer the metal with my other hand around that blade. So any of the cutting that's happening is because I'm pushing the metal into the blade. I'm not pushing with the blade. And that's a huge mistake people make when they're learning how to use the jeweler's saw. They push on the blade breaks, they get angry, they never use it again. So really, it's, you know, if you're in a hurry to get there and you're opening up full throttle, you're not going to get there. I can cut really, really fast. I'm barely pushing at all. You're letting the blade do all of the work. And then when you get near the end, I usually slow down so it doesn't blow out. I slow down because I don't want to jam my blade into the wood and then break my blade, because I'm cheap and I want that blade to last. I'm cutting on a bench dog and a vise so that, for 2 reasons. I have a V so I can support my metal and just be cutting where the metal is most supported. Also, it's wood, so I can cut into it without damaging the blade, and I don't have to worry about breaking the blade as much. I like to cut with the bench dog horizontal because it helps me keep my hand going vertically, which is most effective. You could angle it. Sometimes you need to work inside a corner and you could turn it over. Some people have trouble positioning their body. This might help because I can see it better. But then to cut well, I would have to cut on a crazy angle. So I want to do everything I can to help my arm stay out of the equation and just be a power source. That was a piece of aluminum, super soft, super easy to cut. I also love cutting copper. Here's So here's why jeweler saws are useful. You can do interior cuts. You can fake a more expensive and fancy method of cutting. Like if you're going to laser cut some parts and it's expensive, you could hand cut a prototype. So that's why I love jeweler saw. For decades, I made things professionally that were etched out of metal, but I did all my prototyping by hand. So I have boxes and boxes of tiny little letters cut out of copper and nickel and brass and silver and gold. They're not in this box. I don't know why I've saved these things. I can't bring myself to get rid of them. So being good with a jeweler saw allowed me to make actual hard prototypes and do some testing and adjusting before I spent money on tooling. It's a really nice way to do things by hand, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a handmade object. So sometimes I'm quite careful with the artwork. This is a hilarious thing I found in preparing for this demo, which is going to be a copper napkin ring that says no dessert. It's a punishment napkin ring. And I printed this out in the late 80s. You can tell by the lithos typeface. And I glued it on and I never finished it. I drilled little holes to put the blade through. You could use a punch, but this is too small for that. But this one, which I owe somebody, I just drew on it with a Sharpie. I think it's good enough, and then I'll go back and clean it up with a file. I haven't been all that careful. So here's the basics of using a jeweler saw for something in practice. Let's do copper, because copper is also really fun to cut. Let's do the M. So I'm going to loosen the top part of the blade. Oh, this is a much too small a blade for this. Let's use it till it breaks so you can see what that's like. I'm going to feed it through the hole in the metal. Boop. This is where I like holding the saw blade with my chest, because if I do that, I have both hands free. I can position the blade and tighten the blade. Of course, this is not comfortable. I actually like doing it down lower. It's not comfortable. I think I have a permanent, I don't know, callus, so I don't notice anymore. A couple of things to note also. Once you're loaded up, you can't put this thing down. So when someone comes to talk to you, you're going to break your blade, because you turn your head, that tightens the tendons in your neck, your arm tenses or angles, and the blade snaps. The top and bottom don't have teeth, so if you're going to pause, it's best to pause with the work sitting on that part. You can also usually get away with hanging the blade and walking away. I wouldn't do this around here because somebody will walk by and knock it on the floor. I'm going to put some wax on there, and let's just see what happens with much too fine a blade. That's all right, it's going to work. I also have no neat edge to follow. When I get to the corner, I'm going to not push at all. I'm just going to keep the blade going up and down and rotate the metal. And it sort of uses the tip of the blade to file a radius. And then you can start your forward motion again. This is definitely a sport for people with good vision. I'm not certain I'll be able to do much with this because I can't really see it. I know, old man, get glasses. But these are safety glasses with magnifiers. It's a double win. They're just not quite magnifying enough. Okay, so I'm going to get to the next, and you don't have to slavishly follow the outside. I could decide I want to have a really sharp corner there, so I'll back the blade up. I should talk about that. Backing the blade up is just going up and down, but backwards and a little carefully, and you can go back to where you started, or back to an earlier spot. I'm not going to make you watch. You know what? I'll do the whole thing and I'll speed it up after. Oh, I broke it. I broke it. Did you see when it broke? It broke when I was getting back to the start. So I was cutting on one angle, one path, coming up to another path. There's lots of room to catch the blade, and it just twisted. Usually the blade breaks when it gets a twist this way or that way. So I'm not going to finish that. Why bother? I've used one blade, and that's all I'm allowed. This has been sitting this way for a good 15 years. Now it has half an M cut out for the next 15. Let's try, just in case you want to see thrift in action, I'm going to lose the top part. I'm going to reset my blade height for this little scrap of blade. Come on. And now, of course, I won't have as much cutting depth. I won't have as much blade. It won't work as well, but I can still get some life out of this blade. Because I want to show you how terrible it is to cut tin-plated steel. It's very thin, it's very hard, it has lots of flexibility. It's very likely that as you're cutting, it will just flex and snap your blade. It also sounds terrible. Okay, but once you've gotten confident with this, you can do some pretty fun stuff. I'm not so interested in just cutting crazy shapes. I want this to be useful for something. So I want to show you one thing it is good for. Let's just finish this cut. There you go. So I can do an interior cut. That's exciting. In practice, though, I'm going to punch 2 holes in this piece of metal. I'm not going to use the hole. I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to use those 2. There are lots of times in sheet metal you might want an interior track or an oval opening or some more careful machined sort of situation that you have to do by hand with a jeweler saw. There isn't a machine that will cut that out in our shop. So I'm going to punch those 2 holes, and then I'm going to connect them. I should have drawn a scribe line first, but whatever. So also, the temptation is long strokes, which on softer metal I would. On this tin-plated steel, I like to, it kind of makes sense to do smaller, finer, shorter movements. You end up having a little bit more control over what you're doing. But you can, I think you can see it just jiggling all over the place. It's desperate to break my blade. Okay, that would have been straighter with some scribe lines, but it's straight enough. And then I can go in with a file, and filing along the length of that, I can clean that up really quickly and make a really, really elegant, straight, you get the idea, track or opening. So I use jeweler saws for cutting out letters. That's what I like to do. But there's lots of applications where you might want to do something like that. You might want a slot so you could put something through. Ooh, I almost invented a thing. I was cutting the tin-plated steel with a very fine saw blade. I would cut my copper with a much thicker, sturdier saw blade. It's important to know the difference. There is actually a chart that helps you know which blade to use for what thickness of metal. I've never quite graduated to chart use. I store my blades just in a bin, so I don't even know what they are. I do know that I've got 3 different sizes, and use a thinner one for thinner metal, use a thicker one for thicker metal. If you're not getting good results, it's likely because you're using the wrong combination. You want to have about 2 teeth on the metal. So for metal that's very, very thin, that's going to be tiny little teeth. If you then use that on thicker metal, as you saw, it'll cut, but it won't last very long. If you use the thicker blade on the thin metal, you won't even be able to make it cut. So the blade thickness does matter. I just keep 3 on hand, and I can tell the difference by feel which is which, and I use those. But if you want to do it the right way, there's a chart that will help you know which blade to get. Blades come in packs of 12. You get a little bundle of 12. It's actually kind of a challenge to get the first couple out because they're wrapped in wire. Usually one of them, you can pull one out. If you can't pull it in one direction, it's because the teeth are binding. You can pull it in the other direction. So you can get one out that way. I can't think of anything else we need to say. So if I tried to cut this very thin, nasty steel with my very thick, dull blade that works fine on copper, it's not going to work. This is going to be bad. Brace yourselves, it's going to sound bad, it's going to feel bad. Ugh. Now I can only go upward. I'm essentially just filing with the upstroke. No, can't even do it. So a lot of students do that, break the blade, and say, I hate the jeweler saw. I don't blame you.